My name is Martha Vance. 68 years old. I spent 30 years as an ICU nurse. 2 years ago, I lost my husband. My daughter Stephanie called and said, "Mom, come live with us. You shouldn't be alone." I believed her. I moved in. And over the next 15 months, $50,000 of my retirement savings, the down payment I gave them for their Charlotte house, was followed by my 401k, drained one quiet unauthorized transaction at a time. First it was living expenses. Then, car repairs. Then seed money for Stephanie's husband's business. Every time they handed me a bill, my balance went down. My daughter never once showed me a receipt. But it wasn't only the money. Every morning at 7, I got up and drove my 2 grandchildren to daycare. I cooked dinner, gave them their baths, put them to bed every night until Stephanie and her husband came home. When the children ran fevers, I was the one holding them through the night. Stephanie's way of thanking me was this: "Mom, the only reason we can work this hard is because you're here." Not gratitude. An invoice. I was the babysitter, the ATM, and the cheapest housekeeper that family ever had. Then one morning, I got a call about my sister Sarah. Sarah was my only blood family. My younger sister, the one who called me every single Sunday without fail, who held my hand when my husband passed. Who told me the truth when no one else would. A sudden aneurysm. Nobody saw it coming. She was gone before I could get to her. Saturday is Sarah's funeral, I told Stephanie. I can't watch the kids that day. No pause. No, I'm sorry. That's impossible, Mom. I have my promotion party. Stephanie, your aunt is dead. Silence. And then, just one sentence. Priorities exist. I couldn't say a word. For 30 years I had held the hands of strangers at the end of their lives. I had never broken. Not once. And yet my daughter's 4 words turned me to stone where I stood. If those words hit you the way they hit me, please subscribe right now. Leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from. If you hit like, something good is coming your way today. That Saturday morning, I packed my black bag for the funeral anyway. Stephanie followed me out to the front yard. The neighbors were watching from their windows. She grabbed my keys out of my hand and threw them into the bushes. Then she changed the locks on the front door. That morning, I was locked out of the house I had helped pay for with nothing but a bag packed for my sister's funeral. But what they didn't know, Sarah had left something behind before she died. For exactly this moment, the alarm on Martha Vance's phone never had a chance to go off. She was already standing at the kitchen counter at 4:58 in the morning, waiting for the coffee to finish cycling through its last drips, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug with a small chip along the rim that she had never gotten around to throwing away. Outside, Charlotte was still dark, the kind of dark that belongs only to the hours before the rest of the world decides to wake up the sky. A bruised shade of navy pressing against the window glass, the neighborhood lawns silver with dew. A dog somewhere down the block barked twice and then went quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The heating unit in the hallway ticked on with a soft metallic click, pushing warm air through the vents. Martha had spent 30 years reading silence. In the ICU, silence was never just silence, it was the 3-second gap between a patient's last labored breath and the flattening of the monitor line. The space between a family member's composed expression and the moment they realized what a doctor's careful phrasing actually meant. She had learned to hear what wasn't being said. It was, she had always believed, the most important skill a nurse could develop. And it was one she had never quite been able to leave behind when she retired 2 years ago. This kitchen had its own kind of silence now. She had noticed it creeping in over the past several months, not the peaceful quiet of a house at rest, but something with weight to it. Something that settled behind her shoulder blades and didn't move. She breathed it in along with the smell of the coffee and pushed the feeling down the way she always had, practical and efficient. The way a woman who had watched people fight for their lives in fluorescent-lit rooms learns to push things down. The house itself was beautiful, and she had played no small part in making it so. A 4-bedroom colonial in one of Charlotte's better neighborhoods, with a 2-car garage and a back porch that caught the afternoon light just right. Stephanie had worked hard for this life, Martha believed that, had always believed that, and when the opportunity to help her daughter and her daughter's husband, Jason, put down the down payment had come, Martha hadn't hesitated. That was what a mother did. That was what you did when you had something to give and someone you loved needed it. She had moved in a year later, after her own lease had come up for renewal. And Stephanie had mentioned, almost in passing, that it would be so much easier with someone around to help with the grandchildren. The twins, Caleb and Emma, were 7 now, and Martha loved them with a fullness that surprised her sometimes, catching her off guard at odd moments, a small hand slipping into hers on the walk to school. A drawing taped to the refrigerator that said, Grammy, in lopsided green crayon. She had told herself that this arrangement was a gift in both directions. That it made sense. That family was supposed to work this way. The coffee finished. She poured herself a cup and stood at the counter, and that was when she saw it. A piece of paper, folded in thirds, sitting beside the fruit bowl where the bananas had gone soft and nobody had thrown them away yet. She recognized the letterhead. She had seen it before on the quarterly statements that arrived in her name. The tan envelope with the small bank logo in the upper left corner. She didn't reach for it right away. She stood there with her coffee and looked at it the way she used to stand at the foot of a patient's bed and look at a chart before she was ready to read what it said. Then she unfolded it. The numbers were printed clearly, in the same clean font that financial institutions seem to favor, the kind of font that tries to make difficult information feel neutral and organized. She ran her finger down the column of transactions until she found the one she didn't recognize, a withdrawal from the 401k account. A sum that was not small, noted with an authorization code she had never generated. She read the line 3 times. Then she set the paper down on the counter very carefully. The same way she used to set down a medication vial after she realized she'd almost reached for the wrong one. Her first thought was practical: I need to call the bank. Her second thought came a moment behind the first and was quieter, but stayed longer. How long has this been here? She heard Stephanie before she saw her, the particular rhythm of her daughter's heels on the hardwood. A brisk, purposeful sound that hadn't softened in the 15 months Martha had been living here. Stephanie came through the doorway, still looking at her phone. Her dark hair pulled back tightly, dressed already in a charcoal blazer she would wear to whatever meeting was first on her calendar today. Mom. She was scanning the kitchen the way she scanned everything, quickly, assessing, already moving to the next thing. Did you get to the laundry last night? I need my charcoal suit for the gala on Thursday and I left it in the hamper 2 days ago. It's in your closet, Martha said. Pressed. And my Medicare card, I had it on the counter. I need to bring it to the top drawer of the secretary desk. I put it there on Monday so it wouldn't get lost. Stephanie finally looked up from her phone. She glanced at Martha the way a person glances at a vending machine after it dispenses what they asked for. Acknowledgement without warmth, the transaction complete. Her eyes moved to the 401k statement on the counter. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in her expression. A micro tightening around the eyes, there and gone, the kind of thing you could miss if you hadn't spent 3 decades watching people's faces for what they weren't telling you. Those statements are so confusing, Stephanie said, pulling open the refrigerator. I've told you before, you should just let Jason handle the account management. It's easier. I manage my own accounts, Martha said. Her voice was even. She had spent a long career keeping her voice even. Right, well, Stephanie poured orange juice, checked her phone again. The kids need to be at school by 8:15, and Caleb has his reading evaluation first period. So can you make sure he eats something more than cereal this morning? Last time Stephanie. Martha set down her mug. This withdrawal. I'm going to be late. She kissed the air near Martha's cheek and was already moving toward the door, phone at her ear. Thank you, Mom. The suit looks great. And then she was gone, the garage door cycling through its mechanical groan and clatter, and Martha stood alone in the kitchen. With the refrigerator humming and the 401k statement on the counter and the particular quality of silence that she had been noticing for months pressing in around her from all sides. She folded the statement carefully and put it in the pocket of her cardigan. She would call the bank later, when the children were at school. She would get the numbers in front of her and she would make sense of them. The way she had always made sense of difficult information systematically, without flinching, one line item at a time. It wasn't until she went to the hallway to get her reading glasses that she opened the junk drawer looking for a pen and found the folder. It was plain manila, and labeled, tucked under a takeout menu and a roll of tape. She almost closed the drawer without looking at it. But her hand paused, some instinct she couldn't name making her pick it up. She opened it and read the first line of the document inside, and the fluorescent light above the kitchen sink buzzed on with its particular cold, indifferent hum. The same sound she had heard 1,000 times in 1,000 hospital corridors. The sound of a building that keeps running regardless of what happens to the people inside it. It was an application for an assisted living facility. Her name was at the top. The date in the upper right corner was 3 weeks ago. Martha stood very still in the quiet kitchen, the folder open in her hands, and felt the geometry of her life shifting under her feet like the ground. Deciding, slowly and without apology, to become something else. The call came at 11:43 on a Tuesday morning, while Martha was folding the twins' laundry on the dining room table. She had developed a system for the laundry over the past year, sorted by person, then by type, then folded in a specific order that minimized the number of trips upstairs. It was the kind of system that came naturally to someone who had spent decades managing the organized chaos of a critical care unit, where the placement of every instrument and the sequence of every action could be the difference between a patient walking out of the hospital or leaving in a different way entirely. She had brought that same precision to this house, to its grocery lists and school schedules and the small calendar she kept on the inside cover of her planner, where she tracked every appointment, every school event, every prescription refill date for each member of the family. Nobody had asked her to do this. It had simply needed doing, and she was there. She answered the phone on the second ring. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman named Patricia, who identified herself as a neighbor of Sarah's in Wilmington, and who spoke in the careful, rounded tones of someone who has rehearsed delivering bad news but finds that rehearsal doesn't help as much as they'd hoped. Martha heard the words aneurysm and this morning and very quickly and I'm so sorry, and she stood with the phone against her ear and a folded undershirt in her other hand. And felt the room do something strange around her, not spin, exactly, but go very still, the way a patient's monitors went still in the moments after everything had already been decided. Sarah, 65 years old, her little sister. She set the undershirt down on the table. The pill organizer she'd left on the corner of the table, Sarah's, actually, an extra one. She'd been meaning to mail back to her for weeks, slid off the edge when her hand brushed it and hit the hardwood floor, the plastic compartments popping open, the small white tablets scattering. The sound they made rattling across the floor was thin and brittle, like something that had been holding itself together, finally deciding not to. Martha stood very still and listened to Patricia say a few more things: arrangements, timing, the name of a funeral home in Wilmington, and she said yes. And thank you, and I'll be there. And then she set the phone on the table beside the sorted laundry and put both hands flat on the wood and breathed. Sarah had been warning her for years. That was the thing Martha kept circling back to, standing there in the dining room with her sister's scattered pills on the floor around her feet. Sarah had said things, careful things, loving things, phrased always as concern rather than accusation, because that was the kind of woman Sarah had been. Things like, Martha, you've given that girl everything, and Martha, you need to make sure you're protected. And, once, in the parking lot of a seafood restaurant in Wilmington, after a Sunday lunch that had grown more pointed than either of them had intended, Martha, you're setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. She had always changed the subject. She had always said Sarah didn't understand, that Stephanie was busy, that this was just what families did for each other. She got down on her knees and picked up the pills one by one and put them back in the organizer and snapped it shut. Stephanie came home at 6:15, dropping her bag on the entryway bench with the particular thud. That meant the day had been long, and she was now in transition between her professional self and the version of herself that existed in this house. A version that was not, Martha had come to understand, significantly warmer. She walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator and was studying its contents when Martha came in and told her. Sarah passed away this morning, Martha said. An aneurysm. She was gone very quickly. She paused. I need to go to Wilmington on Saturday for the funeral. Stephanie turned from the refrigerator. Her expression moved through something surprise, perhaps a flicker of something softer, and then settled into the particular arrangement that Martha had been watching it settle into more and more frequently over the past months. The arrangement that meant Stephanie was already calculating. Saturday is impossible, Stephanie said. The promotion party is Saturday evening. Hartwell's entire regional team is going to be there, Mom. This is the culmination of. Sarah is dead, Stephanie. Martha kept her voice level. Your aunt is gone. And I'm alive, Mom. She pulled a container of leftovers from the refrigerator and set it on the counter. Priorities. The word landed in the kitchen and stayed there. Martha looked at her daughter's back at the set of her shoulders. The efficient way her hands were already moving, already past this, already onto the next thing, and felt something inside her chest that was not quite grief and not quite anger. But was related to both of them, something that had been accumulating for a long time without her naming it. I'll drive up Friday night, Martha said. I'll be back Sunday morning. The kids will be with you for one day. You know Jason has the Greenville site visit Saturday. Stephanie turned. Her voice carried the particular edge that Martha had noticed appearing more often lately, not quite impatience. Not quite disdain, but something that lived between the two. We rely on you, Mom. That was the understanding. The understanding. Martha repeated the word carefully. Stephanie's eyes moved to the counter, where a mortgage notice was clipped to the fridge with a butterfly magnet Emma had made at school. She didn't point at it. She didn't need to. Martha had understood that gesture, the deliberate leaving of financial documents in places where they would be seen for what it was for some time now. She simply hadn't wanted to say it out loud. I understand that you have obligations, Martha said quietly. I understand that you have a career and a schedule and a party that matters to you. What I need you to understand is that my sister is dead. She paused. I'm going to Wilmington on Saturday. Stephanie looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through her expression that Martha couldn't quite read, and she was good at reading expressions. Fine, Stephanie said. But when the Thompson event falls apart because there's no one to manage the logistics. I'll be back Sunday. She left the kitchen before Stephanie could say anything else and went to her bedroom. Which was the smaller of the two guest rooms and which faced the driveway rather than the garden. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the Social Security notice on her nightstand. It had arrived 2 days ago and she hadn't opened it yet. Which wasn't like her, and she held it in both hands without opening it now either, just held it, feeling its thin weight. She thought about the folder in the junk drawer. The assisted living application. 3 weeks ago. She thought about the 401k withdrawal. She thought about the way Stephanie had said priorities in the same flat, businesslike tone she used on conference calls. She thought about Sarah, who had seen all of this long before Martha had been willing to. Who had said you're setting yourself on fire and had been right, and who was now gone. And who could not be told that she had been right, and who had left the world on a Tuesday morning while Martha was folding other people's laundry. A mother's love was a bottomless well. Martha had believed that her whole life, had built her whole life around it in some fundamental way. The way a building is built around its foundation rather than the other way around. She had never thought about what happened to a well when someone started throwing stones into it. What happened to the water? Whether there came a point where the stones displaced everything else. She opened the Social Security notice. She read it. She set it on the nightstand. Then she got up and went to the kitchen and began making dinner for the twins, because they were hungry, and because whatever was happening between her and her daughter. Caleb and Emma had done nothing to deserve an empty stomach. But something in her had gone quiet in a way that was different from the usual quiet. Steadier, more deliberate, the kind of quiet she used to get in the 3 seconds before she had to make a decision that couldn't be undone. The morning Martha was supposed to leave for Wilmington, she was already dressed at 7 o'clock. Her small black bag packed and standing by the bedroom door, her good shoes, the navy flats she'd bought for Sarah's retirement party 3 years ago, already on her feet. She had planned to leave by 8, to miss the worst of the interstate traffic. And arrive in Wilmington in time to help Patricia and Sarah's other neighbors with some of the arrangements. That was how Martha's mind worked. She made a plan, she built in time for complications, she arrived prepared. 30 years in critical care had made that reflex so deep it was no longer a reflex, it was simply the shape of how she moved through the world. She came downstairs to find Jason standing in the kitchen with his car keys in his hand. Already dressed in the pressed khakis and quarter-zip pullover he wore to site visits. He looked at her bag. He looked at his watch. The look was brief, entirely without apology, the kind of look that doesn't bother to conceal what it thinks. Stephanie mentioned you had somewhere to be today, he said, in the tone he used for contractors who were behind schedule. The funeral is this afternoon, Martha said. Right. He poured coffee into a travel mug, snapped the lid. The Greenville site won't wait. Been trying to get this meeting rescheduled for 3 weeks. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The implication was already fully assembled and standing in the room, and so here we are. And here you are. And these are the choices. Martha had never entirely understood what Stephanie had seen in Jason Miller, though she had worked for a long time to find something to appreciate about him. He was capable in the way that a piece of machinery is capable, efficient, purposeful, entirely oriented toward output. He remembered her birthday in the sense that he told Stephanie to handle it. He was polite in the way that powerful men are polite to people they don't consider relevant to their goals. Smoothly, without friction, and without any actual warmth underneath the smoothness. He had moved into the background of Martha's days in this house so thoroughly that she sometimes went entire days without speaking to him. And she had told herself that this was normal, that busy people had busy lives, that she hadn't moved in to become Jason Miller's close friend. But she had noticed, in the accumulating way that you notice things you'd rather not, how he sat at the dinner table with his phone face up beside his plate and glanced at the screen every few minutes. How he spoke about the Charlotte house in terms of square footage and market appreciation rather than the rooms where his children slept and played and grew. How, in the past 6 months, he had begun to reference Martha's presence in the house in financial terms. While we have Mom here to cover the childcare, as though she were a line item in a budget rather than a person who had rearranged her entire life to be useful to theirs. She picked up her bag. She was not going to have this argument with Jason. She had learned, through much trial and a fair amount of error, that certain arguments were not arguments at all. They were performances designed to produce a particular result, and the only winning move was not to perform. She was almost to the front door when she heard Stephanie coming down the stairs. The argument that followed happened on the front lawn, and it happened loudly, and Martha would spend a long time afterward turning it over in her mind. The way you turn over an object in your hands looking for the structural flaw you know must be there. It began with Stephanie's voice, tight and elevated, carrying through the morning air in the way sounds carry when the neighborhood is still quiet enough to transmit them cleanly. Mom, this is not the time to be making some kind of statement. You have responsibilities here. My sister's funeral is a responsibility, Martha said. She was keeping her voice low. She was aware of the neighbor Mrs. Dillard, 70-something, who walked her spaniel every morning at this hour, pausing on the sidewalk 20 feet away. There is nothing in this house that cannot manage for one day without me. That's easy for you to say. Stephanie's voice went higher. You don't have to face Hartwell on Monday when the event documentation is a mess because... Stephanie. Martha set her bag down on the porch step. I need you to hear me. Sarah is gone. She is gone, and I am going to say goodbye to her, and I need you to hear that. Something broke open in Stephanie's expression then, not softness. Not exactly, but something more like the thing underneath the hardness. The thing the hardness was there to protect. And for one moment, one breath length of a moment, Martha thought, there she is. There's my daughter. But then Jason appeared in the doorway behind Stephanie, tapping his watch face with one finger. And whatever had been on the surface of Stephanie's expression reclosed as efficiently as a wound being sutured. You're being dramatic, Stephanie said, and her voice had flattened again, cold and certain. You're becoming God, Mom. Sometimes I wonder if you're not, if maybe that facility actually isn't such a terrible idea. Mrs. Dillard's spaniel sat down on the sidewalk. The morning birds in the oak tree at the edge of the yard went briefly, inexplicably quiet. What did you say? Martha asked. You heard me. Stephanie's chin came up. You're becoming senile. Maybe you do belong in that facility. Maybe that would be better for everyone. The word everyone did something particular to Martha's chest, a compression, a tightening, as though her body was registering. Something that her mind was still catching up to. She looked at her daughter. She looked at the neighbor on the sidewalk who had looked away and was now studying something intensely in the middle distance. She looked at Jason in the doorway, who had pulled out his phone and was reading something on the screen with the particular studied neutrality of a man who has decided that whatever is happening in front of him is not, technically, his problem. Then Stephanie held out her hand. "The spare key," she said. "Give it to me, Stephanie. You want to walk out of this house over a funeral? Fine, but you don't get to come and go as you please while we're covering everything here." She snapped her fingers once, a gesture so casually imperial that Martha felt it in her teeth. The key. Martha reached into her cardigan pocket. She set the key in Stephanie's palm. Stephanie threw it into the boxwood bushes along the front of the porch. Nodded Martha to the side, dismissively, the way you throw away something you have decided has no further use. "Don't bother coming back," Stephanie said, "until you're ready to be useful again." She went inside. Jason followed her, pulling the door shut behind him with a click of the electronic lock that was, in its way, completely final. The lock's small green light blinked once and went dark. Martha stood on the front walk with her bag in her hand. And the neighborhood sounds coming back in around her: a car passing, the distant sound of a lawnmower, Mrs. Dillard moving down the sidewalk with her spaniel, not looking back. She looked at the welcome mat on the front porch. The word welcome in its cheerful green font, slightly faded from the weather. She had chosen that mat. She had ordered it online in the first week after moving in, trying to do something small and warm for the house she was coming to live in. She had thought, when she set it on the porch, that it represented something true about this place. She had believed, in the uncomplicated and entirely sincere way that she believed most things, that she was welcome here. And just before she turned toward her car, something made her glance back: some nurse's habit of checking, of making sure she hadn't missed something, and she saw it clearly for the first time. The corner of a legal-sized envelope tucked under Stephanie's arm as she disappeared through the door. Thick, institutional, with the embossed seal of what Martha recognized, with the clarity of a woman who had spent her professional life reading official documents, as a legal filing. A petition for guardianship was the shape of it, the particular weight and size. The clicking of the electronic lock behind her was the loudest sound Martha Vance had heard in a very long time. She walked to her car. She started the engine. She drove. She made it to the highway before the rain started. It came in that mid-Atlantic way, not gradually, not with the polite warning of a distant rumble, but all at once, a solid gray curtain dropping from the sky without apology, the windshield going opaque for a half-second before the wipers caught up. Martha turned them to their fastest setting and kept both hands on the wheel and drove, because that was what you did. You kept driving. You put one thing in front of the other. You handled what was in front of you, and you did not fall apart inside a moving vehicle on Interstate 85. She pulled off at a rest stop 40 minutes south of Charlotte. The rain made the asphalt shine like black glass, and the parking lot was nearly empty, a semi-truck idling at the far end, its running lights orange in the gray air, and two other cars pulled in beside the concrete building with its locked bathrooms and its vending machines. Martha sat with the engine off and the rain coming down on the roof in a sound like static. Like the white noise machines they used in hospital corridors, like something designed to fill silence with something that was not quite sound and not quite quiet. She sat with Sarah's funeral program in her hands. It had arrived in Thursday's mail. Patricia had mailed it early, so Martha would have it, and she had put it in her bag without looking at it, telling herself she'd look when she was ready. She looked now. There was a photo of Sarah at 62, taken at a beach somewhere, squinting into the sun with that expression she'd had her whole life, the expression that said, "I see exactly what's going on and I've decided to love you anyway." Beneath the photo, in a simple serif font, Sarah Jean Vance, 1960-2025. She loved fiercely and without condition. Martha folded the program along its crease and held it in her lap. Then, because she was the kind of woman who believed in knowing what she was dealing with, regardless of whether she wanted to know it, she opened her bag and took out her bank statement. She had printed it 2 days ago when she'd gone to the library. She had not wanted to look at it in the house. Had not wanted to be seen looking at it, and she had folded it and put it in her bag and carried it with her the way you carry something you're not ready to look at but know you can't throw away. She unfolded it and read it in the gray rain light. The first withdrawal she'd already found, the one on the 401k statement on the kitchen counter. But there were others here, smaller ones, spread across the past 14 months with the irregular spacing of transactions. Someone is trying not to make look like a pattern. 180 here. 240 there. A charge to a tutoring service she didn't remember authorizing, though the twins did have a tutor she'd assumed Jason and Stephanie were paying for it. A charge to a recreational equipment company for something called a travel hockey package, which she was fairly certain cost more than her first car. She went through the statement line by line. She added the numbers in her head, which had always been precise and which remained so now despite her hands. She noticed, beginning to shake slightly with something that was not cold. She got to the bottom of the column. She looked at the total. She looked at it for a long time. Nearly $12,000 over 14 months. Not from a joint account, not from any arrangement she'd agreed to. But from her personal retirement funds, the account Jason had insisted he could manage more efficiently for her. The account she had allowed him access to because he was her son-in-law. And she had trusted that word the way she trusted words like family and home and together. She put the statement away. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and saw Stephanie's name, and below it, a text message that was brief enough that she could read the whole thing without opening it. FYI, your room is being repurposed as a home office. Jason needs the space. We'll figure out your stuff when you're back. She read the message twice. Then she set the phone face down on the passenger seat. The rain was relentless. It came down in sheets that obscured the far end of the parking lot, turning the semi-truck into a blurred orange glow in the gray. Martha looked at the water running down the windshield in crooked rivulets, each one finding its own path down the glass. And she thought about the morning she had sat in a hospital room 31 years ago and held Stephanie's hand while her daughter slept, 4 hours old and startlingly small. Her face pressed against Martha's wrist with the instinctive trust of something entirely new to the world. She had thought, sitting in that room with the tubes and the monitoring equipment, and the smell of antiseptic, that she understood the word love for the first time at its full size. She had thought, this is what I am for now. This is the organizing principle. Everything else arranges itself around this. She had arranged herself around it for 41 years. She had given Stephanie the down payment, $50,000, her own savings, her own years of night shifts and holidays worked and vacations not taken. She had given her time, her labor, her body's daily energy, her professional precision applied to the domestic infrastructure of someone else's life. She had given her presence, which a woman of 68 who had recently lost her sister and was watching her retirement accounts empty out did not have an infinite supply. She had given, and kept giving long past the point where any account balanced. And her daughter had looked at her on the front lawn this morning, in front of a neighbor and a man who did not love either of them particularly well, and said the word senile with the casual certainty of someone who had been assembling a case for a while. The weight of 68 years settled on Martha Vance in that rest stop parking lot with the rain coming down and Sarah's funeral program in her lap, and it was not a metaphorical weight. It was physical. It was in her shoulders and the small of her back and the place behind her sternum, where she had spent her career teaching herself not to feel too much too fast. She had nothing left, in any direction she could look, not a home that was hers. Not an account that hadn't been compromised, not a daughter she recognized, not a sister to call. She sat in that parking lot for 18 minutes. She had always been good with time. Then she started the car. She had a funeral to get to. She had one last thing she could do for Sarah, and she was going to do it. When the world goes dark, you find out who was holding the flashlight. She had known this, had seen it proved in the hardest circumstances imaginable, had held the flashlight herself for people she would never see again. And she understood now, in the particular cold clarity of a parking lot in the rain, exactly who had blown hers out. But something else was happening underneath the grief and the exhaustion and the weight, something small and unyielding, the way certain patients would sometimes get quiet in a way that wasn't the quiet of surrender, but the quiet of a person who had made a decision and was gathering themselves to act on it. Martha recognized that quiet. She had seen it before. She had it now. She put the car in drive and pulled back onto the highway, and the rain kept coming. And she drove south toward Wilmington, toward the last goodbye she had left to give, and she drove with both hands steady on the wheel. Well, friends, here we are. halfway through Martha's story. And I have to say, if your heart isn't hurting a little right now, you might want to check your pulse. We've watched a woman who gave everything, her savings, her time, her whole retired life, slowly realize that the people she gave it all to had been quietly calculating how much more they could take. The missing 401k money, the assisted living application, the front lawn confrontation, and now, sitting alone in a rainy parking lot with her sister's funeral program in her hands. But did you catch it? That quiet at the end, that stillness, that isn't defeat? I've seen that look before, and I promise you, it doesn't mean Martha is finished. It means she's just getting started. Stay with us, friends. The second half of this story belongs to Martha Vance. And it is worth it. Sarah's funeral was small and honest, the way Sarah herself had been. 14 people in a white clapboard chapel 2 miles from the coast, the smell of the ocean working its way through the old building's imperfect seals, salt and something living underneath it. The pastor was young and clearly hadn't known Sarah well, but he had the good sense to keep his remarks brief and then step aside for the people who had. Patricia spoke. A woman from Sarah's book club spoke. A man who had been her neighbor for 22 years stood up and said, simply, that Sarah was the first person who showed up when you needed someone. And the last person to make you feel that you owed her anything for it. 3 people cried at that. Martha was one of them. Afterward, sitting in the small reception room with a paper cup of weak coffee, Martha found herself looking at the table, where a dozen framed photographs of Sarah were arranged: Sarah young, Sarah middle-aged, Sarah at the beach and at her retirement party and at Christmas 3 years ago, when she and Martha had driven down together and spent 4 days cooking too much food and watching old movies and arguing, with deep affection, about almost everything. In one photograph, Sarah had her arm around Martha's shoulder and was laughing at something outside the frame. And Martha looked at that photograph for a long time. You saw it before I did, she thought. You always saw everything before I did. She thought about Thanksgiving of 2018, the year of the down payment. They had been in Sarah's kitchen in Wilmington, the 2 of them, while the rest of the family was in the living room, and Sarah had set down her dish towel and looked at Martha with that expression, the seeing one, and said, Martha, I need you to listen to me. Don't give them that money without protecting yourself. Let me talk to my lawyer friend. Let him draw something up. Martha had said that families didn't need lawyers between them. She had said that Stephanie was her daughter. She had said she could hear herself saying it now, in the particular register of certainty that had always been her weakness. I know my own child, Sarah. And Sarah had said, gently, the way she said hard things, I know you do. But knowing someone doesn't mean they can't hurt you. Sometimes it means they can hurt you more. She had insisted on one thing, in the end. Not a formal loan document. Martha had refused that much, but a side note, handwritten, signed by both of them, that Sarah had kept in her fireproof box. A document that acknowledged the down payment and its relationship to the property's equity. A small, practical thing, the kind of thing a woman who had been watching her sister give and give and give for decades thought to do without being asked. Martha hadn't thought about that document in years. She thought about it now. Jason, at every dinner she could remember in that house, sliding bills toward her on the table with that empty corporate smile. Stephanie, mentioning the mortgage notice when Martha mentioned wanting to attend her sister's funeral. The steady, quiet transfer of her financial security into someone else's daily life. Dressed up as family. Dressed up as this is what we do for each other. Sarah had seen the greed before Martha had. That was the truth of it, and Martha sat with it in the small reception room, the paper cup going cold in her hands, and let it be true. Hindsight is a cruel mirror, she thought. But it's the only one that doesn't lie. She set down the coffee. She opened her planner to the page where she'd written Patricia's number. And underneath Patricia's number, in her own handwriting from 3 days ago, was the address of Sarah's attorney, the lawyer friend Sarah had mentioned, who Patricia had told her on the phone was handling Sarah's modest estate and who had, apparently, been holding something for Martha for quite some time. She had an appointment tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. She looked once more at the photograph, Sarah laughing, her arm around Martha's shoulder. Whatever the joke had been lost now to time. But the joy of it perfectly preserved, and she felt something shift in her chest. Not the cold compression of the parking lot. Something different. Something with edges that pointed outward rather than in. You knew, she thought. And you made sure I'd have something when I finally knew too. She closed her planner. She finished the cold coffee. She drove to the small motel 2 miles from the chapel and checked in and slept, for the first time in weeks, without lying awake. Listening to the sounds of someone else's house settling around her. The law office of Richard Calloway occupied the second floor of a narrow brick building on a street in Wilmington's older downtown, 3 blocks from the Cape Fear River. The building smelled of old wood and paper and the particular dry warmth of spaces that have housed serious work for a long time. Martha arrived at 8:55, because she arrived everywhere at 8:55 when the appointment was at 9. Richard Calloway turned out to be a compact man in his late 60s. With the careful manner of someone who had been handling other people's most consequential paperwork for long enough to understand that the paper and the life are not always the same size. He had known Sarah for 12 years, he told Martha. She had been a client and then a friend and then one of those people you think of when you think about why you chose the work you chose. He set a folder on the desk between them. Your sister was extremely organized, he said. She told me, perhaps 2 years ago, that if anything happened to her there was a document you would need to see. He opened the folder. She was very clear about that. The document was the side note. Martha had signed it in Sarah's kitchen in 2018, her own signature, in her own handwriting, at the bottom of a page that described the $50,000 contribution to the Charlotte property, and Sarah's insistence that it be acknowledged as a form of equity rather than a gift with no strings attached. There was a clause, written in plain language rather than legal boilerplate, that established Martha's right to 30% of the property's equity in the event that her continued contribution of labor and resources to the household could be demonstrated. Martha read it twice. She read it a third time. Is this enforceable? She asked. In North Carolina? Richard Calloway folded his hands on the desk. With the right documentation supporting the labor contribution claim? Yes. Especially if there's evidence of financial irregularities involving her accounts. He paused. Are there? She reached into her bag and placed the printed bank statement on the desk. Then the 401k withdrawal notice. Then, because she was Martha Vance and she had spent 30 years in a profession where you documented everything. Because the documentation was the difference between a mistake being caught and a mistake becoming permanent. She placed the small spiral notebook she had started keeping 4 months ago after she first noticed the 401k discrepancy dates, amounts, account numbers. The precise language Stephanie had used when she'd suggested Jason handle the account management, the date and approximate time she had found the assisted living application. Richard Calloway looked at the notebook. He picked it up and leafed through it slowly. I see you, nurse, he asked. 30 years, Martha said. He set the notebook down carefully, the way you set down something you've just understood the value of. Ms. Vance, he said, I'm going to need you to give me about a week. And I'm going to need you to do 3 things before you go back to Charlotte. She listened. She took out her own pen and wrote down what he told her, because she never relied on memory alone when the stakes were high and she had paper in front of her. The first thing was to contact her bank directly and begin the process of revoking Jason's access to the retirement account. Richard gave her the precise language to use: formal, unambiguous, immediately effective. She called the bank from the parking lot before she drove back to the motel. The woman on the phone was efficient and professional, and the process took 11 minutes. When it was done, Martha sat in her car for a moment and looked at her social security card, which she kept in her wallet in the card slot nearest the front, where she could always find it. Her name, her number, her record, her power. The second thing was to gather every canceled check, every bank statement, every piece of paper that established her financial contribution to the Charlotte household over the past 15 months. She spent that afternoon and evening in the motel room with her bag appended on the bed, sorting through the meticulous records she had kept with the same systematic care she had applied to everything else in her life. She had not kept them because she was suspicious. She had kept them because she was Martha Vance, and Martha Vance documented things the way other people breathed automatically, without needing a reason. Because it was simply what you did when you understood that the gap between "I believe it happened" and "I can prove it happened" was the most consequential gap in the world. The third thing was to do nothing that would alert Stephanie or Jason that anything had changed. Martha understood this instruction without needing it explained. In the ICU, there were moments when the most important thing you could do was to keep your face and your voice and your movements completely ordinary, while the thing you had just understood was rearranging everything inside you. You did not let a patient's family see the thing you had just seen on the monitor. You did not let the room know that something had shifted. You gathered yourself, and you moved to the next step, and you saved the information for when it would be most useful. She drove back to Charlotte on Sunday morning. She returned the spare key that Stephanie had thrown into the bushes. She had gone around to the side of the house and found it on Saturday before the funeral, and she made breakfast for the twins. And she asked Jason about the Greenville site visit with exactly the right level of polite interest, and she pressed Stephanie's work blouse for the Monday meeting, and she said nothing. But in the pocket of her cardigan, folded in quarters, was the bank confirmation number for the account freeze. And in her bag, organized in 3 labeled envelopes, were 14 months of canceled checks that added up to a number she now knew precisely. A storm was coming to Charlotte. Its name was Martha, and it knew exactly what it was doing. Wilmington on a Thursday. Martha had chosen Thursday deliberately. Stephanie had a regional directors meeting from 2 to 5 that she never missed. And Jason's standing call with his investors group ran from 3 to 4:30. The twins were at school until 3:15 and then at an after-school program until 5. Martha had managed the logistics of this household for 15 months. And she knew its rhythms the way she had once known the rhythms of a critical care unit, who was where, at what hour, and what the windows were. The meeting was held at a downtown Charlotte law firm that Richard had connected her with, a woman named Angela Reyes. Family law and estate litigation, whose office was on the 14th floor of a glass building on Trade Street with a view of the city that Martha found both appropriate and slightly beside the point. The conference room smelled of fresh coffee, which Martha appreciated. She sat on one side of the table with Richard and Angela. The chairs across the table were empty. They had been given 12 hours notice. Stephanie arrived 7 minutes late, which was unlike her, and the 7 minutes of lateness told Martha something she had already suspected, that Stephanie had spent the morning trying to determine what, exactly, she was walking into. She came in with Jason, who wore the expression of a man who had done a calculation and was not yet sure whether the numbers were going to work in his favor. He sat down with the studied smoothness of someone who had been in negotiating rooms before and believed that posture was a form of argument. Stephanie's eyes went to Richard, then to Angela, then to Martha. "Mom," she said. Her voice had the controlled quality of a woman who had learned, professionally, that the person who shows alarm first loses. "What is this?" "This," Angela Reyes said, sliding a document folder across the table, "is a notice of equity claim and financial mismanagement against the property at 4412 Elmhaven Drive, filed on behalf of Martha Vance." She let a breath pass. "I'd recommend you both take a moment with those documents before we proceed." The silence while Jason and Stephanie read was a particular kind of silence. Martha had been in rooms with that kind of silence before, the silence of people encountering information they had believed was beyond reach. Turning pages with the careful movements of those who are buying time for their faces to compose themselves. Jason looked up first. "This is based on a side note that Sarah Vance, who is not a party to the property, had no standing to create." The side note, Richard said calmly, was co-signed by Martha Vance and witnessed. "It establishes her acknowledged contribution to the property's equity. What gives it particular weight, in addition to its own language, is the supporting financial record." He nodded to the folder. Exhibit C. Exhibit C was Martha's spiral notebook, professionally transcribed, appended with the corresponding bank statements. 14 months. Every dollar. Every date. Every transaction that had moved out of Martha's retirement accounts through the access Jason had been given. Stephanie's face, as she turned those pages, did something Martha had not seen it do in a very long time. It went uncertain. Not remorseful, not yet, perhaps not ever, but genuinely uncertain. The expression of someone who had built a structure on an assumption that the other person would never look closely enough, and who was now understanding that the assumption had been wrong. "I'm not your ATM, Stephanie," Martha said. She said it quietly, the way she said things that mattered. "I'm your mother." And you failed the audit. Stephanie looked up. Something crossed her face, pain, or the memory of pain, or the place where pain would be once the shock cleared. Mom, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen, Angela said, in the measured tone of a woman who had seen this precise scene many times and had no interest in prolonging it unnecessarily. Ms. Vance is pulling her equity from the property. She is freezing all co-signed accounts. She is revoking the power of attorney, which takes effect as of 3 days ago, when the paperwork was filed. She paused. The property goes to the bank unless you can refinance to cover the full mortgage independently. Which, given the current state of Mr. Miller's project loans, and yes, we have looked at those, is going to require some significant restructuring. Jason's jaw tightened. He tapped the table once with one finger, that same gesture measured, mechanical, the gesture of a man who thinks he is still in control of the meeting. You're going to blow up your own daughter's family over a... Jason. Martha looked at him directly. She had not looked at him directly in a long time, she realized. She had spent 15 months managing around him, accommodating him, treating him as a fixed feature of the landscape rather than a person making choices. You opened accounts in my name without authorization. You directed transactions from my retirement savings to cover expenses that I was never consulted about. And you encouraged your wife to file a guardianship petition against a woman who had done nothing except trust you both. Jason said nothing. His jaw stayed tight. His eyes moved to the window with the view of the city. The guardianship petition, Angela said, has been withdrawn as a condition of proceeding without criminal referral. That document, she tapped the folder, contains the withdrawal notice. The foreclosure warning for the Charlotte house had been generated that morning, a procedural step that Angela had explained would happen the moment the equity claim was filed and the accounts were frozen. Martha watched her daughter look at that document. She watched Stephanie's credit score, which Angela had been monitoring through an arrangement Martha didn't entirely understand, but trusted because Angela Reyes was clearly very good at her job, begin its adjustment in real time on the screen of a laptop at the corner of the table. You could have just asked me, Martha said. She was not performing this. She was not saying it for the benefit of the attorneys or the room or the record. She was saying it because it was true, and because truth had always seemed to her to be worth saying. Especially when the person it was meant for could not hear it. If you had needed help, if you had been struggling, you could have just told me. I'm your mother. That's what mothers are for. Stephanie looked at her across the table, and for a moment, a full, real moment, longer than the one on the front lawn, Martha saw her daughter's face do the thing it had done when Stephanie was very young and had been caught in something she knew was wrong. Not defiance, not the executive composure, just her face, unprotected. Then Jason put his hand over Stephanie's on the table, and Stephanie looked away. We're done here, Jason said. Yes, Angela agreed pleasantly. You are. In the end, justice didn't feel like a hug. Martha had not expected it to. It felt like a balanced checkbook, the precise, bloodless satisfaction of columns that finally added up correctly after a very long time of someone putting their thumb on the scale. It felt like the moment in the ICU when a patient's numbers stabilized and you knew the crisis had passed. Not because anything was simple or easy or over, but because the immediate danger was no longer uncontained. She shook hands with Angela and Richard in the lobby. She took the elevator down to the parking garage. She sat in her car for a moment, not from paralysis this time but from the particular stillness of something completed. She drove back to the house on Elmhaven Drive for the last time, to pick up what was hers. She did not take very much. She had never owned very much that mattered. The town was called Southport, and it sat at the mouth of the Cape Fear River, where it opened into the Atlantic, 17 miles south of Wilmington and about as far from the world of Charlotte marketing galas and quarterly projections as Martha Vance had ever been in her life. She found a house through Patricia, who knew someone, in the way of small coastal towns, where the social architecture is built on long-standing connection rather than transaction. A small white bungalow on a street 2 blocks from the water, with a porch that faced east, which meant the Atlantic sunrise came to her every morning she was home to receive it. The rent was reasonable. The neighbors were quiet. The town had a diner, a library, a small urgent care clinic that had asked, delicately, whether she had any medical background and might consider a few hours a week. And to which she had said she would think about it and had been thinking about it ever since with something that felt unexpectedly like anticipation. She had been here 6 weeks when she sat down at the small table on the porch with her coffee and the new prescription pill organizer she'd bought at the pharmacy down the street. It was blue, with a simple latch on each compartment, and she filled it carefully every Sunday evening as the light changed over the water. One for her blood pressure, which her own doctor had been telling her to address for 2 years. One for the vitamin D supplement the same doctor had recommended. Nothing dramatic, nothing urgent, just the ordinary, manageable maintenance of a body that had been worked hard for 68 years and deserved, now, to be taken care of. She had told herself when she left Charlotte that she wasn't going to spend time in anger. Anger was a thing she had always respected in patience. It was often a sign of life, of engagement, of the refusal to simply accept. But she had also seen what happened when it became the organizing principle rather than the fuel for a specific action. Anger without direction was just heat. She had used hers for what it needed to be used for, and now she was done with it. She thought about Stephanie sometimes. She thought about the girl who had pulled her hair when she was 3 and laughed about it. The teenager who had called from a payphone at 11:30 on a Friday night in 1999. Terrified, asking to be picked up without judgment, and whom Martha had picked up without judgment. The young woman at her college graduation, cap askew, grabbing Martha's hand and squeezing it hard without saying anything, which had been the most honest thing Stephanie had ever communicated to her. She thought about all of that, and she held it alongside what she knew now, and she found that both things could be true at the same time. That Stephanie was the girl she had loved and the woman who had failed her, and that holding both truths was not comfortable but was honest, and she had always valued honesty over comfort. The grandchildren were the tender part. She had written Caleb and Emma a letter, 2 letters, actually, one for each of them, adjusted for their different personalities. The way she had always adjusted to the particular frequency of each person in her care. She had told them that she loved them, that she was well, that she was living near the ocean now. And there was a very good chance she would see dolphins from her porch if she was patient. She had said that sometimes grown-ups made choices that were complicated and hard. And that none of those choices had anything to do with how much she loved them. She had included her new address and phone number and told them they could call whenever they wanted. She had put both letters in a single envelope addressed to the house on Elmhaven Drive, the twins, and had mailed it without return address because she was not yet ready for what a return address would invite. She had consulted Angela Reyes about the will 2 weeks after arriving in Southport. The conversation had been efficient and warm. Angela, it turned out, was that kind of attorney, which Martha suspected was part of why Sarah had recommended her friend to her so many years ago, knowing that Martha would eventually need exactly that combination. The new will directed the largest portion of her remaining assets to the Coastal Hospice Foundation, which was one of the organizations Sarah had volunteered with in her retirement. A smaller trust, carefully structured, was set aside for Caleb and Emma, accessible to them independently. When they turned 25, in the way of inheritance trusts designed to reach people when they are old enough to use what they receive, rather than have it managed on their behalf by people with competing interests. Angela had approved the structure. Martha had signed where she was told to sign. She set down the coffee and looked at the water. The sun was just clearing the horizon, the Atlantic going from gray to copper to the particular bright hammered gold that only lasted for the first few minutes of full dawn before the sky pulled it back and turned it into ordinary daylight. Pelicans moved in a low formation over the water, impossibly steady for birds, banking together without apparent communication. A fishing boat was working its way out past the channel marker, its running lights still on, though it was already bright enough not to need them. She was 68 years old. She had spent 30 of those years in critical care, tending to other people's most urgent hours. She had spent the years since tending to a family that had mistaken her tenderness for inexhaustibility. She had made mistakes. She had been too trusting, too willing to accommodate, too committed to the idea that love was best expressed through giving without condition. And she had paid for those mistakes in the currency of her own financial security and dignity. She knew all of that. She was not interested in revising it into something more comfortable. But she was here now. She was on this porch, in this light, watching pelicans work the morning thermals with their ridiculous ancient grace. She had her health, more or less. She had her precision and her competence and the 68 years worth of knowledge that lived in her hands and her mind and her chest, knowledge that was hers. And that no one had managed to take from her or spend without her consent. She picked up her coffee mug, the one without the chip, a new one she'd bought at a shop on the main street in Southport. Run by a woman who made them herself and who had told Martha, when she'd come in and spent 40 minutes looking at pottery, without buying anything, to take her time, that the right one always made itself known if you were patient. She had taken her time. She had found the right one. At 68, she said to the water and the pelicans and the brightening morning, starting over isn't failure. It's freedom. The words didn't echo back. They didn't need to. She was whole. She was Martha Vance. And she was, finally, without qualification or condition or the weight of someone else's need pressing down on the word, she was enough. For the first time in years, the only person she had to take care of was the woman in the mirror. And that woman, she was finding, was very good company. Friends, how did you find today's story? I have to be honest with you, Martha's story stayed with me long after the ending. Not because it's dramatic, though it is. Not because justice is served, though it is. But because of that image at the very end, a woman on a porch, watching the sunrise, alone and completely herself for the first time in years. There's something in that picture that I think speaks to all of us, no matter where we are in our lives. Think about what Martha actually did. She didn't start out brave. She started out making coffee at 5 in the morning, folding someone else's laundry, managing someone else's schedule, trying to be useful enough to earn the right to stay somewhere she had already paid to be. That's not a story about a weak woman, that's a story about a woman who loved so completely that she didn't see, for a long time, that the love wasn't being returned. And I think a lot of us know exactly what that feels like. What changed Martha wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was an accumulation of small truthful moments, a bank statement, a folder in a drawer, her sister's voice saying you're setting yourself on fire, that finally added up to a picture she couldn't look away from anymore. And then she did what trained, disciplined people do when they finally accept the diagnosis. She made a plan. She documented. She moved with precision. She used every skill she had earned in 30 years of saving other people's lives to save her own. We all face moments where we have to choose who we are. When the people we've loved and sacrificed for treat us as a resource rather than a person. When the comfortable story we've been telling ourselves stops holding up against the evidence. Martha Vance had that moment in a rainy parking lot with her sister's funeral program in her lap and $12,000 missing from her account. And she chose to be the woman who drove forward. I hope this story brought you something today, a little comfort, maybe, or a little fire. Or just the reassurance that it is never too late to stand up for yourself. That the skills you've built over a lifetime are still yours. That a fresh start at 68 is not a failure, it is a homecoming. If Martha's story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you've lived something like this, if you've been where Martha was, or know someone who has, I'd be grateful if you'd leave that story in the comments below. Your voice matters here. Please subscribe, and hit that like button, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. This community is built on stories like Martha's. I'll see you in the next one.